ancillary X-rays, or unremarkable, that's okay, highly unreliable. Okay, so we've come a long way through here, and it's been and I think we said somewhere or other it's
The same thing under ancillary aids. Probing tooth movement demonstrated is highly unreliable. Please tell me what you mean by that.
Sure, okay, right. So these are cumulative decisions that you take right from the outset, and frequently you would have branched off at a different point long before you might have taken X-rays anyway, and I hope that would be understood. But just taking it in its simplified form here. And Dr. Emily, I happened to come in at the tail end of his talk on that, and he was saying how you can so easily miss the diagnosis, even with a trained eye. Positioning is so very difficult, and so on. A client has recently been to the periodontist, and the periodontist, specialist periodontist, a dentist working in the periodontal field, was saying how terribly unreliable are oral X-rays, and that you can misread them, that the bacteria can be in there, that the problem can persist, and you frequently only know once you've extracted the tooth and you say, oh, look, there's the fracture in the tooth root, and so on. So, and especially this is the case in animal dentistry. The animal can't tell you, you don't know whether it's feeling pain, whether the anaerobes are in there and creating all sorts of other havoc. So, what one might say at an initial assessment, unremarkable the result. The person with a conventional view would say, well, that's okay, we'll hold that to be true. The person who's erring on the other side would say, no, we're not going to depend on unreliable X-rays. The chances are the person in D column wouldn't be in that position anyway, because he's saying, look, we've got to have prevented it in the first place, because we don't want to get ourselves into retrospective assessment of a problem that is already in existence, because we know that our diagnostic means are so blunt and so ultimately unhelpful to the extent that we're overlooking very important issues.
So this doesn't have to do with diagnosis of existing disease?
Yes, it does.
This type,
yeah.
Still.
Can we talk later? Or do you...
I thought it would be useful for me. If I can't understand what you're saying about perioprobing and X-rays, then there may be other similarities.
Right, okay, perioprobing, most unreliable, especially, for instance, in these cats with these great bulbs. What do you call them? What do you call those bulges around the canines? Juga. Yeah, huge great things. You probe those, you'll get nowhere. And yet you pull the tooth and it comes out, it just falls out in your hand. Sorry. For instance, the periodontist complaining in similar vein to this client that probing, we don't get the answers, and in any event it's retrospective, and as you've said yourself, with 2 millimetres that's held to be normal, but who knows, and it's a moot point as to what's a periodontal disease-free mouth and what isn't. And as you'll note from the cybernetic hypothesis, even minor periodontal disease is viewed to be a severe issue. So you don't want it to occur even for a few days. Certainly not to the point where you're now at the point where you can say, ah, yes, there is disease there. Let me say for ourselves that the best way of assessing if a mouth is healthy or otherwise is just to smell it, and just smell the gases given off by the bacteria, and if it doesn't smell, then chances are you're okay. And that's, as rough as it may seem, a more precise means of assessing the health of an animal's mouth.
Dr. Van
Tom, I really don't know where to start in discussing all the points you raised with you, but I guess the smartest thing is to go back to the beginning and just take it one by one, perhaps. Firstly, if disappointed by the number of people here, I suggest that perhaps the question charging people tend not to come into your theory. So that's just a statement, so I don't expect an answer to that.
Oh, you'll get one.
Secondly, let's go back to the history of things, and you've done some terrific historical research here on various avenues. Tom, did you research whether periodontal disease in animals existed before Uncle Ben started?
Yes.
Did it? There's nothing in here, did it?
Did periodontal disease exist?
Yes, of course it did. It's part of the natural ecology, and it's a very necessary aspect.
Raw things and wild natural things was still getting periodontal disease.
once they ceased eating natural things. So you've got... Sorry?
What they eat next?
Well, then they were waiting to die.
Okay, what about the fact that...
But Collier wrote all about that, but not from exactly the same...
Are living a lot longer now through increased understanding of nutrition, better feeding rationales and regimes. Does that not come into, decaying mouths and the fact that we might expect to see problems engaging animals that are now living older? I mean, what was the average age of an animal for a dog, say, in 1850? What did it live at? 5? 6? What do they live to now? 15? 16? That's double, triple previous lifespan. You wouldn't expect that problems might occur simply through age?
No, not at all.
You wouldn't expect it?
No.
Okay, so old people don't get mouth problems. Another question I just had to ask, and it's way off theme. Have you ever been to a dentist?
Oh, frequently.
Have you ever been to a dentist?
Many.
Why?
Because of poor oral hygiene. Because of all the things I'm saying.
You change your diet, obviously, so you won't have to go to a dentist ever again.
No.
Also, because there are specialists that you don't recognise. I mean, human dentists didn't exist, say, 200 years ago. So the fact they exist now is a slight on the world of specialists and the medical world. Is that correct?
It's quite incorrect, and you make a whole range of assumptions that makes it almost impossible to advance beyond phase 1. Let me just refer back to your questioning of the cost. Well, you have finished as far as I'm concerned. The cost that you initially refused to bear.
Yeah, I thought everyone had a right to ask questions.
Well, they do.
It's up to you, Doug, as
they do.
Moderator of this argument.
Yes, all right. Well, if you want to ask 5 minutes of questions, then go ahead, and you've got 2 more minutes.
Oh, I was just starting. I mean, I've got a long way to go yet. We've just gone back to the beginning of the book. Oh, is that right? I'm sorry, I didn't realise. Well, I'll squeeze in one quick question then. Tom, do you also recognise the fact that over years, the wild dog that might have just a couple of 100 years ago has been changed through our breeding programs and whatever we want to do? The Pekingese dog, only came to being through breeding and so on, from the natural wild dog straight many years ago. So, I mean, do you take into account the fact that there's different mouth structures and the Persian cats are different from any other cat and Pekingese dogs are different from any other dog? They might have natural malocclusion problems, might have problems with chewing things. Do you accept that? Now, if you go back to the beginning, that's the first one. But the question about the cost is the question for the statement, and you don't have to answer that.
Now, well, it seems that you've got something causing you trouble there. You refused to pay when you first came in. Well, let me just say that it's costing me a lot of money to hire this hall tonight. And I don't necessarily wish to invite people completely gratis. It would be nice to get some return. That's my decision, please. Now, in regard to the whether our animals are natural animals or not, of course not. We've heard that some are telocephalic or whatever it's called, and others are brachycephalic, and the mesos in the middle would be the best of all. And that we therefore, on the one hand, have unnatural animals, and we also have unnatural diets. Well, let me say to you that if, instead of giving them unnatural diets, we give our unnatural animals natural diets, we will do them a lot of good. And in fact, they need the natural diets more so than indeed the mesocephalics. Because these brachycephalics and the ones with the long noses and so on are even more predisposed to periodontal disease. So you have to institute even better preventive care right from the outset when they're very little puppies and kittens. And in that way, you'll have trouble-free development through adolescence to maturity, and they'll go on strong from there. So you're absolutely right that we've tinkered with the breeds. There are 1 or 2 that may, and there's always a possibility of genetic incapability to deal with the natural diet. And maybe we'll show that. And if you have a look through the preventative dentistry notes, you'll see that we've alluded to that we had a couple of collies, 1 collie. Some of our staunchest supporters have a big collie kennel, and they say, it is fantastic, those animals are so healthy, goodness gracious how we were badly had in the past. One of them came one day with chicken vertebrae jam-packed all the length of its rectum. We pulled them out. They said, look, don't worry. We felt a little bit sort of responsible because we'd advised the natural food. So sure, there will be problems, But if it's handled in the correct way, that'll be fine. In the preventive dentistry notes, you'll notice I talk about a tiger that had a similar problem. Sure, in the natural state, that's Mother Nature for you. Perturbations at the margin. But by and large, you've got to look at the core issues and resolve those. At the margin, there will be some pretty severe problems, but let me say there won't be anything like gastric dilatation volvulus and FUS and all of those sort of things that once again we feel just aren't going to arise once we get back to treating the animal as a carnivore.
Dr. Madison.
I'm just interested in I note that you deplore what's called reductionism, i.e. ascribing a single cause to any problem, and you deplore the cause and effect model because that's reductionism. And I don't quite understand, that's probably my core training, what is different in what you're proposing, i.e. that commercial dog food is causing all of these problems by giving all problem made to animals, why that's not reductionism. And what's a problem with the cause and effect? You are in fact proposing that there is a cause of periodontal disease in seasonal animals, and that is commercial food. And yet you say that the cause and effect model, i.e. the scientific principle of establishing a cause and effect, is wrong. So I don't understand. And my third question is...
hang on, how many questions is that? I better be sure how many questions that is. Yeah, start again.
Why are you any different from what you're saying the scientific therapies? And then I'm particularly interested in the carpets of Middle America. I'm not quite sure about that.
So, what's the difference between reductionism and what I'm saying? Yeah, number one. Number two, what was that? Sorry, go.
Why do you deplore the scientific principle of cause and effect when in fact you're proposing that there's a cause and effect of feeding commercial food?
Right, and the carpets you're concerned about. Okay. Reductionist arguments. Well, reductionism takes the world at large and says it's too big to assess all in one go, and of course it is very tricky, so well, let's reduce it to its component parts. And once we've got a handle on those, then we can assume all the rest, or the glue in between, is all the same difference. Don't let's worry about it, put it back together again, and we've got a fair understanding. It's an interpretive thing, and in fact it can give rise to some incredibly sound understandings or helpful advances. In fact, when you adopt the holistic approach, it can be very troublesome indeed, both for your own mental capacity and to communicate this. Increasingly with the computer age, this doesn't affect one nearly to the same extent, because in fact you can enter all the data simultaneously but then just twiddle around with reductionist parts of it and see how it affects the whole simultaneously, and you can just code in that, and suddenly you can get altogether different patterns within that holistic system. So it's possible to have a better understanding. In terms of why I'm any different, because I'm citing that at the gingival margin all of this is occurring, I'm saying that's a critical aspect. I'm including all other aspects, but that this one is the critical place in which the whole thing can interact. Dr. Bennett, who seems to have got delayed in the traffic, is working on a mathematical model which includes the whole panoply of things, but it still comes back to the interface at the gingival margin, which has a critical effect, so that we are talking about linear cause and effect, but in two directions, for instance. So that, say, you've got the death of the neutrophils in the gingival sulcus, simply there because there's the build-up of bacteria, flood of neutrophils, cytokines, the toxins then travelling back to the kidneys, creating glomerulonephritis due to some sort of antigen-antibody matrix in the glomeruli, build-up of ammonia, whatever, back to the gums, exacerbating the problem there as well. So in the past it's been commonplace to say, oh, an animal with bad kidneys will have bad gums. And then others have come along and said, oh, an animal with bad gums will have bad kidneys. And the two camps have been absolutely trenchant and said, oh, no, we're right, no, you're wrong, and so on. We say it's a bilateral arrangement, but it also interacts with all the other organs. because, of course, by this time, of course, with the increase in toxemia, and so the ticker's not working so well because the cardiac musculature's bathed in the toxins, and also now the increase in pneumonia, and so you've got, and so on. You get this downward spiral. Now, that's simplified in the extreme, of course.
But you've still got a single cause, which is commercial food, not soft food, not anything else but commercial.
Now then, this is where you get triggers, and so you get one trigger which creates an incremental disadvantage for the animal. So what we've said, and if you've read my professional point of view, we're talking about diets as comprising three things: quantity, quality and frequency, and these have all got to be optimised. Now, okay, in the wild state, and suddenly the carnivore's got one big carcass, so it's got huge quantity, but it's only got it on one day of the week, and the quality was all right on day 1 to day 2, it deteriorated a bit. And by the end of the week, whilst in fact there was quantity and quality there initially that was sufficient for its needs, the frequency was wrong. So as a consequence, there was not gingival scouring. So as a consequence, you got a build-up of the plaque. As a consequence, you got the neutrophils crowding in, and so on. So I am not just citing processed food as just the bogey per se, but all of these just interactive aspects of it. So for diet to be complete and balanced, and God forbid that we should ever find out, because we probably have to be God ourselves, because it's an impossible task, certainly to do it from a reductionist point of view and get the building blocks and say then you know what the 100% complete and balanced is. But in general terms, you can properly say that through the lifespan of the animal, and this is another thing you've got to factor in, the time base, how long the animal's destined to be on the planet anyway, how long its teeth are designed to work within a normal life expectancy, then its food should be provided to it sufficiently frequently, of sufficient quality and sufficient quantity to satisfy all those other requirements of the animal's biology. Carpets, can I just talk about carpets, or somebody else might ask it?
Tom?
Hi.
I've heard you on numerous occasions on your videos and your tapes, and I've been asked here by you tonight to come here with an open mind and to hear your arguments and to take it all in as to see whether what we are saying may be wrong and what you are saying is right. And what I came here and expected to hear, or expected maybe to see, was some scientific evidence or some case studies that would show maybe before and after change of diet, that might show me pocket depths or something, at least something to give me some sort of scientific profile on what you're proposing. And in the hour you've been given, and if the cameras are off, I'd probably say there's a lot more stronger than I'm going to say. But in the hour you've been given, I've heard 50 minutes of a diatribe of what I would call absolute diatribe, and 2 case study names that I saw on the board. I honestly don't think what you've said is worthy of any reply. And what I'm going to say is that in my 15 years of a professional career, I have never before been ashamed to call myself a veterinary surgeon. And tonight, I really believe I am ashamed of that, and it's not myself I'm ashamed of.
Well, thank you for those remarks. It's good that you were able to feel free to voice your opinions here tonight, and that makes me feel very comfortable. That you are ashamed for me, you need not be. That's my responsibility. You take care of yourself, please, Stephen. In terms of case histories, I presented those at the Metropolitan Practitioners Branch. I, in fact, sent some through to you in Melbourne. We have got a whole range of others, the next 8 that happened to come by that had a reduced white cell count, reduced red cell count and so on, I alluded to at the tail end of the discussion. It's a very big subject, this. I wasn't going to bore you with columns of figures and outcomes and this, that and the other. It's another story for another day. It follows the pattern that I specified. In terms of pocket depths and so on, you're suggesting to me that I talk your language. I think if you read through the notes, you'll see that this is where we differ. That the language is different, the approach is different. The attitude is different. That you haven't quite comprehended what I've had to say here, I'm concerned about, because I haven't presented the argument in a lucid enough way that could speak to you in a way that you could understand. Hopefully, over the ensuing years, I'll do a better job. So you called it a diatribe. Well, that's a word in the English dictionary, and it's a pretty severe one. I accept that that's how you perceived it, but I stand by what I said.
Dr. Blumen.
I'd like to make a few points on this emotive issue. Apart from this, and I've written this and I'm reading it because I am so emotional about it. Apart from being a farmer's daughter and having a friend with hardashes...
Can you slow down?
Apart from being a farmer's daughter and having a friend with hardashes, I have no vested interest, but I'm extremely concerned about the current trend in encouraging pet owners to use both public health and our agricultural industry to feed more meat. There are 3 parasitic diseases in sheep in Australia with one thing in common. That is that they are all the result of the presence of a cystic state of tapeworms which infect dogs. Least important is Taenia hydatidina, which causes condemnation of livers. For example, between 1966 and 1975, there was 11.4 to 29% condemned annually. Of great economic importance is Taenia robus. The sister surface develops in striated muscle, resulting in significant economic loss due to condemnation. For example, a shipment of bone mutton worth US $1.5 million was rejected due to Taenia robus. The only attempt to control Taenia robus infection in Australia was described by Schmidt, I'm not sure, and White, and involved prohibiting the feeding of raw meat and offal to dogs along with the treatment with a TSI in the test area, resulting in reducing the prevalence of Taenia robus over a 4-year period from 6.9 to 0.3%. At this time, it was pointed out a relaxation of these measures would lead to a rapid reversion. It is known that thoroughly cooking meat or freezing it at -10 for 7 days will destroy the sister surface larva. The third cystode, and one of the greatest public health significance, is of course echinococcus, the cause of the notifiable disease. Control campaigns have been strikingly successful in reducing hydatidosis. For example, prevalence rates in Tasmania reduced from 13% to 0.22% over an 11 to 12-year period. Control measures are similar in both Tasmania and New Zealand, where deaths from hydatids have been highest. Deaths still occur in both Australia and New Zealand. Admittedly, the numbers are a lot lower, but that's because our surgical skills have improved. The doctor's surgical skills have improved. Control aims at preventing dogs eating raw offal, and in fact, under the Stop Diseases Act, it is illegal to feed raw viscera to dogs. So everyone should remember that. Illegal. The use of teniicides, feeding proprietary dog food, monitoring home killing, notices in all butcher shops in New Zealand warning against the feeding of offal or raw offal or meat, and preventive spraying are all means employed to control this disease. My greatest concern in this current debate about reversion to natural diets are: 1, are we warning clients not to feed raw offal at any time or under any circumstance, ever? 2, are we ensuring dogs in our area do not holiday on farms or have any access to sheep, and if so, are we advising them against eating raw meat? 3, many of our clients obtain their dog meat from animals not killed in slaughterhouses, subject to the same degree of scrutiny that animals killed for human consumption are. We have a meat pet place opposite our clinic, and I've seen how they cut up carcasses. It is very easy to lacerate a hydatid cyst and for it to contaminate muscle. Therefore, if we are recommending raw meat consumption, shouldn't we encourage owners to obtain it from a butcher? I think, humans shouldn't be subject to any risk personally. Having read John Bilger's book, The Lucky Country, and now realise what a noise a vocal minority can create, I've developed a very healthy scepticism about what I read or hear in the media, but have our clients. I feel in the future, before any approach to the media is made, the subject should be looked at more fully.
These parasites have been around for a while, and they're not going to go away overnight.
Excuse me, Dr. Flynn.
There are measures, as you've alluded to, and there probably will be more. There'll be plenty of opportunity for you to gain employment in those areas, seeing as you have such a keen interest. We need people with that sort of conviction to solve those sort of problems for us. But in this multifaceted environment that we live, then there are competing interests, and we have to take account of the fact that the animals are entitled to a satisfactory sanitary state for their mouths, their owners for satisfactory state of their hip pockets, and the environment at large is entitled to a fair deal as well. So balancing all of these things can be a bit of a tricky political issue. At the moment, I might suggest that it's resolved by and large by those with the most economic might, and in some ways tempered by those who have the proper scientific, in this instance reductionist scientific understanding of the issues. Making an accommodation won't be easy, and in any event there's a time base to be considered, because some of these things are going to change, mutate, our concerns and understandings are going to be affected over time. What I'm saying is not to necessarily encourage people to go out and infest their animals with tapeworms and then spread them widely. And neither do I think is it the intention of Uncle Ben's or Tucker Time, when they're putting on their labels to feed bones, that they want the same to occur. So if you have a legitimate concern, and I believe you have, then you should think it through and think how you can integrate all the other legitimate concerns that you ought to have for the patients under your care, and that you should therefore liaise with all the other players and see if you can fix up the most suitable accommodation.
Could I just have one concession on a raw offal from you? Can you please recommend to your clients that they cook their offal?
You don't need to extract any concession from me on that score. I don't mention offal in my recommendations to my clients, other than to say not to feed it. So, you know.
You don't feed any liver for vitamin A or anything like that?
No.
Oh, as long as you know that.
Oh, I'm pleased that we...
That's unusual, Tom, because way back...
Excuse me.
Sorry.
You finished it?
Yes, thanks.
Tom, I don't really know. I haven't even heard your arguments till today. The village or otherwise, I don't know. Unlike Stephen Cole, who obviously knew a lot about you and a lot about your opinions. I heard the first time, got a message of some of your attitudes, before I even got a message about your opinion, earlier on in the week when I came here to Sydney for a graduate course on dentistry. I hear you today with a very open mind, because I know nothing about you. And I'm completely bewildered, not so much of the topic, which I think you are showing a fairly low level of knowledge on the topic that you are talking about. Because I think that you are also selectively picking up arguments and picking up issues to suit what looks to me to be your own issues. And you go with them only as far as it suits you. And as soon as it has got no value for you anymore, you drop them where you are. I presume I haven't, for example, heard you criticizing the university that have actually given you a degree in veterinary science. I presume you do have one. And you have criticized a lot of other organizations that you have fed on and lived from in your professional career. I hear you criticizing the specialists, I hear you criticizing nutrition, I hear you criticizing home care, and I hear you criticizing a lot of other issues. I also hear you talking about the relationship to kidneys and liver and other diseases. But I really wanted to know whether you are truthful to your arguments, to your holistic approach, which I think is a tremendous approach, and I think it's got plenty of merits, but ought to look for a different champion to push those issues. I really want to know if your holistic approach is extended to its fullest. Do you practice vaccination in your practice? Do you condemn to death animals that have been found to suffer kidney disease? Do you prescribe treatment for those conditions? And how do those modern treatment of vaccination and other surgical and medical treatment of those conditions suits to the model that you have put to us here in relation to the treatment and prevention of periodontal disease?
Can you just repeat the last question, last sentence? How does it, what? Say that again. Suit the model?
How does your holistic approach with periodontal disease in both treatment?
I think
the prescriptions that you have given us about cracks.
Fine. Okay. I think the best way of overcoming all your concerns, which you seem to have heartfelt concerns, is to come out to the surgery and we'll just give you a tour around and you can...
I think as a professional man who's described things to us here, you're asked a question and I think you should answer those in verbal rather than utilize a low level of having to drag me to your practice to show me things that you can explain to us here. You've been adequately supplied with the language to explain all your before, and I see no reason why you can't address the question in the same manner.
Fine, and I will...
listen to you, and I think you should give me the privilege of having the answer.
Well, I've now listened to you twice, and thank you. I was going to suggest, and I did suggest, that you should come out to the practice because I don't bear you any animosity in the same way that perhaps you appear to bear me, and I think that way we could reach a better understanding. And in this, I wish to help you in understanding what I'm having to say. That can be arranged at any time of your choosing. In the meantime, I'll run through this list of things that you've put before me here. I intimated and have strongly endorsed throughout the discussion and subsequently that we underscore all of our treatments with all of our animals that they should be as close as possible within the current confines. They should be put on what would be considered to be a natural diet as being the necessary to underscore their future well-being. And we constantly reiterate that point in handouts, in consultation and so on, where people come into our surgery for what they consider to be a 5 or 10 minute quick consultation and are jabbing away. We're frequently there an hour later discussing the ins and outs and the complexities of the whole thing. We do that repeatedly, especially when they come in the first instance. Our clients, in fact, are reducing in number in that area considerably because their animals don't suffer any problems of any sort. They don't suffer the fleas, just as Tom Hungerford said. They don't suffer the musculoskeletal ailments. The gynecologist and obstetrician who delivered our recent child, I've never seen these animals. A lot of people's animals I have never seen. I have just talked with them over the telephone. In this case, I talked with him personally. You should see the letter of recommendation of the endorsement of what we told him at that time. So our animals are now enjoying a fabulous return to health. It is staggering. The little white dog that you saw on the video came to us with a sore hock. Now, in terms of the complexity of the treatment that we afford them and so on, in the old days, sure, I would have treated the hock when I was new out of college and I would have left it there, probably. Increasingly, as I got to have a bit of a greater understanding, I would have talked about the bad skin, the bad ears, the fact that the heart was sloshing around in the chest, and I might have said, oh, well, we'll do some heartworm tests and so on. Well, we did all of those things as well. That particular dog had a cholangiohepatopathy, and it weighed 3.7 kilos. And as part of the survey that we're doing, we said, okay, at our cost, and we do most of this stuff at our cost because the clients can't be required to pay for something they didn't come in for in the first instance, and we're saying to them, we'll mend your animal for you, and there's a lot of information to be had out of this. So we take the blood and we send it off to the laboratory, and they say cholangiohepatopathy in addition to all the other things. And it has 6.8 was the white cell count on that particular animal. 2 months later, it was a lively little cricket with no teeth in its head on raw chicken wings and table scraps and nothing else. It's 12 years of age, it's gained 20% increase in weight, and its white cell count's at 14. I would suggest that that's probably some sort of inflammatory peak there, maybe, for all its other pathology that it's got plenty of, although by this time its skin, its ears are a hell of a lot better. It's 20% increase in weight. In terms of whether we vaccinate animals, prescribe other treatments and so on, well, if it's in the interests of the animals, that particular animal, the owner does not want the fact it's got a mammary tumour now, she doesn't want that taken off, she doesn't want any more. But what we did, we interceded where we saw there was a big problem with this animal. She perceived it as being a lame critter. We said, sure, it's lame. It's got 3 other legs, don't worry about that. We'll take x-rays along the way. We did it in front of the TV cameras. We're not afraid. We're not ashamed. The animal got very, very much better. Could have been here tonight. That owner is so elated. In terms of vaccinations, sure, we do them, but we say, in the pandemic of periodontal disease, wherever it is, and it's around, that this is of much less significance to the needs of the animals. For non-existent diseases, when did you last see distemper? Hepatitis hasn't been recorded in yonks. Parvovirus is not an issue beyond the first year of life.
Tom, in
contagious hepatitis.
Excuse me, Tom. In page 8, 9 and 10, you mention the word periodontal disease a fair bit, and you say that periodontal disease is insidious and hard to detect, and you say that X-raying is highly unreliable in detecting periodontal disease. First of all, do you feel that periodontal disease exists, and if it does, what's your definition of periodontal disease?
Oh, it very much exists. It's the subject of this.
It's very difficult to diagnose according to what you've got here in pages 8, 9 and 10.
Yes. That's right, at the early stages. That's right. Or at clinically significant stages. So that by the time we, in a ham-fisted way, with the methodology that we have at our disposal, come to diagnose it, and the problem is pretty severe.
What is your definition of periodontal disease then?
Well, it would be according to the textbooks and the case notes here.
Because I was led to believe that one of the things in periodontal disease that bone loss, alveolar bone loss, is one of the important diagnostic factual tools in diagnosing periodontal disease, but you suggesting that X-raying is highly unreliable in diagnosing.
Well, it surely is, because it's retrospective, and you would need to diagnose it way before you've got bone loss, before you're really doing any good for the animal. By the time you've got bone loss, that animal is in critical condition. It should never arise, and as I was saying, and had you listened earlier on, you might have heard me say that in the natural state it doesn't arise because they're constantly getting the massage of the gingival sulcus. And of course they've got the mesocephalic head and all of those other things that contribute to the health and well-being of the oral cavity. But retrospective diagnosis of a preventable condition is an abomination, in the same way that Serena here was concerned to avoid or prevent hydatid disease and the other cesto diseases before they occur, because the treatment is very expensive, very imperfect, and frequently fails. Now, that's what I'm on about. We must intercede early in the piece. We must look back at the fundamental biology of the animals and the environment and the holistic situation. There's no way that we can land ourselves before the board because of some oversight in another so-called conventional area whilst we're pursuing our other interests over here. No way. I would suggest to you that you look at our logo on the front. That's a picture of the shop, because I hope you'll be able to come out and visit, and that's how you recognise where we are. The cat's not always there on top of the roof. But incorporated in the logo, it says prevention above all. And that's prevent all your ills, all your ailments, all your worries. Lie straight in bed at night, sleep soundly. So it wouldn't matter what disease or issue you want to discuss with me. I would say where it can be prevented and we've got an idea or a handle on what prevention might entail, let's prevent. Hi. Didn't notice you up there, sorry.
I think I won't have to use that next slide also. I think that there's a considerable error in this message that you've espoused. And I fear the danger is that it's getting diluted by overstatement. And apart from being bored with scientific facts, I think we are eager to hear them, and that's, I think, the crux of the problem. And science makes progress by cautious, immediate tweaks and understatement. And I think what we're eager for is a whole bunch of your observations and clinical records together with your conclusions, but also to have them submitted so that they can be scrutinised by the peers and also the remaining drawn from other explanations. Because I think that we need to be careful that we're not straying into what Robert Williams calls veterinary science, theory. But I think the owners still need to prove it. And also to submit the facts so that other interpretations might also be drawn from them. And I think you have to prove this to us, not us trust you that you're right. That's how we're making progress. I know, just finally another question. What is your natural diet? You have to verify its nutritiousness or its suitability for all your patients.
Fine, it's difficult. Okay. Well, there's a few aspects there. First of all, I should thank you for speaking partially on my side anyway. You should come and join us down here. Thank you for that. Now, that I should be producing a proof here for you on a big subject, I tend to disagree because, in fact, I'm a practitioner first and foremost, and it's quite appropriate for practitioners to raise legitimate concerns and then hand them over to the research arm of the profession whose responsibility it is to look at legitimate concerns. When this did not occur, I then did take it upon myself to produce the so-called scientific proofs and the columns of figures and so on. I'm well on the way to doing that, but I could not time this meeting. I had no say in the rate at which my research material would be generated in order to bring it to the meeting. And because it coincided with the ABDS and so on, I chose this time to call a meeting to discuss the broader implications. But I'm confident that the so-called proof, in fact it's extremely strong corroborative evidence of all that I've said, is in terms of the foul mouth AIDS, the foot pad and foul mouth disease, and my young colleague Jason here is here to bear me out on this. Extremely strong stuff. We will put it before you if and supposing we get a forum, but it's been extraordinarily difficult. What I had to say last time I felt was significant, as did a number of colleagues and clients to bear it out. This time I had to pay for the hall myself, and on and on and on. So it's troublesome. But we're committed to the task because it's a worthy one. You say that you don't take it on trust. Well, neither should you. But neither should you require me to finance the whole thing and sort it all out and then present you fait accompli and say, there you are, lap it up, it's yours, take it away, free, gratis. But I'm doing my best. That I should submit it to my peers, well, that's highly questionable, because I would suggest to you that certainly the cybernetics, when it's really explored in all its ramifications, is very much akin to what steam engine or well, hang on, I don't put myself in that sort of company, but Darwin had equally crackpot notions when he produced his Origin of the Species. But he was very wise not to submit it to the local vicar and the parish council for their review, because those were his peers, but the way they would have treated his remarkable new discovery, well, we wouldn't be discussing it here today. So with his steam engine, had he submitted it to a committee of horse grooms, they would have been at the top of their tree because they've had hundreds of years of practicing it. They would know how to polish a wonderful shine on the haunch of the Percheron, and they'd be able to cut a checkerboard pattern in it. and they'd know how to muck out the stall, and they'd do all of that stuff. But if he produced perfectly lined drawings and instructions on how to use his steam engine and submitted them to his peers at that point in time, then I venture to say that we'd still be getting around in horse-drawn traps. So don't set so much store by peer review, because it's mostly prejudice review. And this is exactly the same experience that probably one of the greatest scientists on the planet today experiences, and that's Jim Lovelock. He has devised the cybernetic hypothesis. Lynn Margulis, professor of biology, microbiology at not MIT, Massachusetts University, is his collaborator in this. She was on the science show the other day, and she was espousing on how extraordinarily difficult it is to get really valid, vital, new information out to the public, because the peer review committee sits there protecting its ass.
Thank you, Dr. Lonsdale. Any further questions?
Greg Martin, Tom, a couple of comments.
Are we right with this?
Some time ago you've mentioned that you're inviting lots of people to come out and visit your practice, and on the basis that it's a good way to share information and to avoid increasing the emotional content of the debate. Some time ago you were invited to visit other events on the same basis, and you declined on the grounds that you thought our opinions were poles apart. And I think that we would still extend that invitation to you. The second thing is that I failed to see how your diet can be called a natural diet. It is not a natural diet when you're feeding raw meaty bone as the bulk of the diet, and the rest of the diet is made up of plant material. The third point I'd like to make is that we know very well in Australia that 50% of the calorie intake of companion animals in Australia that we use to prepare pet food, the other 50% is table scraps, raw meaty bones, and anything else that the dog can publicly get to feed. So already one could assess that the public is already part of the way, or most of the way, towards your natural diet anyway, based on that.
I've got my fingers crossed.
The fourth thing is, and I must say I've been misled on this point, that when I watched a replay of the Ray Martin program, because I think the dog's name was Tess, the issues that were raised, or the clinical problems that were raised with that dog, were that it had mammary tumours, it had a sloshy heart, it had skin disease, and it had severe dental disease. And I'm sorry, but I got the impression that no conventional treatment was used in that case, that it wasn't that the teeth weren't called, but they obviously were, that no antibiotics were used, and that the only treatment was a natural diet. And I raise this point because we have received at Upper Beans a number of inquiries from the general public who saw that show and who switched their dogs onto the diet that was recommended in that show. And they've raised concerns in that they've experienced problems with that recommendation. Animals have developed intestinal obstructions or become constipated, and they've rung up and Ben's asking us, what are we going to do about Dr. Lonsdale? So I'd like to make you aware of that. The final comment that I have is that and it's something related to your diet, because I'm quite interested to look a little bit further at your diet. And you've said that raw meaty bones and chicken wings in dogs should be 50 to 60% of the diet, and that in cats it should be 90%. And I guess my question is, so that I can understand the diet a little bit better, is what type of bones do you recommend? And is it on a volume basis, a weight basis, or an energy basis that you're recommending the 50 to 60% or the 90% in cats?
Well, seeing as I'm paying for the revenue, for the room, you're getting very good value of all this information out of me. Sorry?
We're also paying.
Sure. 6 questions. Is that the total?
There was one question, and that question relates to the volume, weight or energy as a percentage of the diet.
Volume, weight or energy.
Yeah, you said that...
Okay. We'll work through it and hopefully we'll get to the end of the list within the 5-minute allocated. Poles apart, sure. Okay, we were, and that was at a time, can't recall exactly, but Barbara Fougere attended. It was interesting. We gave her 3 hours of 3 vets' time on that particular occasion between 2 and 5, and we discussed at length. So it was 9 man-hours devoted to discussing with Barbara on that occasion. We did say, whilst, sure, we'd be happy to take up your offer of hospitality, that there probably would not be a great deal to be gained by that, because we're abundantly aware of your stance. We are effectively the challenger in this regard and say, look, you folks have got it wrong, and the chances of us being won back over onto your side would not be very great, and it would be wrong of us to come down there feigning sort of interest in doing that when in fact we hadn't. Don't forget that we've been educated and some might say indoctrinated into the view that what you were selling was the appropriate tucker. And we had, at the end, rebelled against this at some considerable discomfort to ourselves, mind you, to research it, to work it all through and find out just exactly how we did stand, given there were no guidelines because we couldn't refer to the book anymore. And that certainly you would not be in the business of listening to us. We had already listened to you, had found your message wanting, and had rejected it. So that was all. But if you want to re-extend the invitation, I'd be delighted to receive it. The mail arrives at our place 5 days a week, and we open our mail, we respond to every letter. My diet. Oh, God damn, it's not my diet. It's our effort to get as close to what the feral cats and the dingoes eat in this wide brown land of ours as conveniently as we can with the materials at our disposal, and then we stand back and conduct effectively our lifetime trial to see if they thrive on that, which is similar to your trial except that you run yours for 6 months and under very controlled conditions. What we can say in every instance is there's a marked improvement. I can show you the testimonials, I can show you all those things about how the animals on our diet. So we tend to get corroboration support for what we're saying from that. Immense support, in fact. This is how we progressed, because we started off by, look, I don't know if I can look out my old diet sheets. It said cats, canned food, table scraps. And I don't even think we mentioned bones for cats. For dogs, it was dry food, table scraps, and occasional raw bone. Make sure it's a big one, a big dinosaur bone. Those are the sort of words we used to use, and fresh water constantly available. We rotated all the way around. We say water, raw meaty bones that they can eat, and table scraps. In last resort, the other. In terms of whether there are so-called micronutrient deficiencies and so on, it's not a natural diet. There may be, but it is a huge, it's a quantum, it's several quantum leaps up from what they were previously on. They just flow through the doors on a regular basis. Now, let's just touch on the, we'll come to that in sequence. 50% prepared, 50% etc. and so on. We're sure, but if you read the professional point of view, you'll see that diets need to be given with the right frequency, quantity and quality. So I don't know about this 50% and whether they're all on, half the animals are 100% on your food and half the animals are on table scraps and raw meaty bones, or on what order or sequence. This is the sort of thing that we need to address to find out. I know from our experiences, our clinical trials that we're constantly running. And let me say that when I'm prepared to stand up in public, I've got to be bloody careful what information I put before you and whether I can verify it and have you come and see, where there's a standing invitation to come and see for yourselves. Then it's got to be pretty accurate. I know that I'm in dangerous waters, and I recognise that it's important, and I recognise that to fulfil my commitment, having come across this information and found more and more and more, that I must bring it to the attention of my professional colleagues. It is my duty. Now, you talked about the video. Oh, for God damn it. Go and look at the video. There's two videos out there. There's the investigator's video where the little animal's had all its teeth taken out, and there's the other Ray Martin video where it's chewing on the chicken bones without any teeth in its head, and it's gained 20% in weight, and it now sleeps soundly, and the owner's absolutely thrilled, and its skin's cleared up, and all of those things. Now, you're right that it's not loaded up with digoxin, and it's not on all sorts of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and it doesn't need any flea treatment, and it gets nothing other than fresh food and the table scraps, and it's very cheap to keep, and it has improved immeasurably. And I can tell you that it was on Buffet, Pal and Chubb. Those were the three foods that it was on previously. We have not, in fact, previously spoken about the particular brand names, but seeing as you're from the company that produced two of them, I think, then we will mention. We'll also mention that a number of my clients have written to you and complained about the state of their animals on your diets. I'll also accept that some animals, when switched, and switched abruptly onto raw bones, become constipated. Sure, because their bowels are so flaccid, because all they've been doing is passing the treacle and the foul stuff. And they cut.
Are there any further questions?
Sorry.
Any comments? Well, if there are no further questions or comments, I'll thank you for your attendance. Thank Dr. Lonsdale for his address, and prepare the next one.
Thank you. Thank you kindly.
What are the names of those clients? Because I'm not aware that, I mean, I'm not in looking after customer service, but if somebody's written to us, I'm not aware that it's come up as a problem, but I'm certainly interested in finding out.
Yeah. I mean, you've got a huge problem, but I'm not at liberty to give my clients names.
We're all on the computer database, so I'll just search through and find out any queries that we've had and come back to you.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean,
I'm interested that my comments at the end weren't videotaped too.
Weren't they?
No.
Don't know.
Hey, can you tell me, what I would like to understand here, is that on volume or is it on weight?
That what?
The recommendation on about 50 to 60%.
Oh, look, it's rule of thumb. Rule of thumb. This is how it's devised, in the same way that yours is rule of thumb for your recommendations. Whenever you make a recommendation, you say 25% up or 25% down, which makes a 50% divergence.
Ours are all based on energy.
Sure. Look.
But is it visually assessed or how?
Visually assessed. I mean, it's the way of feeding animals, as opposed to the so-called.
This volume.
Yeah, animals feed themselves as they do in the natural state, and you find that they self-select the amount of food they want, the quantity, and so on. And that's what we're putting before them.
Okay. Commend you on your courage to stand up and say what you think.
Good, mate. That's great. And you'll be back in touch, eh? Yeah. Good on you.
Tom, when are you going to put all this stuff together? I mean, it's very laudable that you're having good results with the stuff, but I mean, there just might be some alternative explanations for it.
Sure.
Until, I can read all the stuff and say, well, maybe something else is going on.
Where are you from? And
Adelaide.
How long are you up for?
I don't know. And until, that you need to invite alternative explanations. I mean, otherwise, the theory's not going to hold water. I mean, I think that there's some substance in what you're saying and doing. But I think in every case that you have to entertain alternative proposals and alternative explanations for it to test your theory. And you can't argue with success, but you can't also be self-deluded in the
look, sure, absolutely.
So more objective stuff you get. I mean,
modern day fashion.